Have you ever jumped into a new card game and made so many mistakes that made you question your ability to just basically read a card? Well, welcome to my first week on Riftbound, where I managed to turn what should have been a simple game into a masterclass on how to not play the TCG. And coming from Pokemon cards, I thought I'd had it figured out, but spoiler alert, I was wrong. I'm embarrassingly wrong. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you 10 common mistakes that I made as a complete Riftbound player beginner so that you can learn from my pain and avoid looking like you're playing with your cards upside down. And if you're thinking about trying Riftbound yourself or you're new to the game, stick around because these mistakes cost me more games than I'd like to admit. But at least my suffering and my mistakes can be your education. Now, let me start with the most fundamental mistake that haunted me for days. Completely ignoring the basic turn structure. So Riftbound has made it incredibly simple. You have A, B, C, D system. Awakening phase, beginning phase, channel phase, and draw phase. It sounds easy, right? I spent my first 3 days playing like I was still playing a regular card game, just doing whatever I felt like right in the moment. I'd forget to ready my cards during the awakening phase, I'd sometimes skip the beginning phase entirely, and somehow I managed to mess up the simple act of just drawing a single card. It's like trying to drive a car but forgetting that you need to actually turn the key first. The game has a structure for a reason, and ignoring it is like trying to build a house without a foundation. Every turn became this chaotic mess. I realized halfway through that I'd forgotten something crucial. The worst part is that this isn't even complicated. It's literally just 4 steps in order, but when you're overwhelmed by everything else, even the basics become challenging. And trust me, master these 4 steps first or you'll spend every game playing catch up with yourself. Now here's a mistake that still makes me cringe. I keep forgetting to sometimes actually play my chosen champion onto the field. I would sit there with my champion card at the side, planning elaborate strategies, while completely forgetting that the champion needs to be played onto the battlefield to do anything. It's like buying a sports car and then walking everywhere because you forgot you own it. Your champion is literally one of the centerpieces of an entire strategy, and I was treating it like an expensive paperweight. I'd spend turns building up my board, managing my resources, and wondering why my deck felt so weak. Meanwhile, my opponent's champion would be out there dominating the battlefield, while mine sat comfortably at the side, probably wondering why it bothered to show up in the game in the first place. The moment I finally remembered to play my champion, a lot more strategies started to click. Suddenly my deck had direction, some of the strategies made more sense, and I stopped feeling like I was playing with half a deck. But those first few games where I essentially just played championless, let's say that those weren't my finest moments. Now speaking of forgetting things, let me tell you about what I call the forgetting epidemic that plagued my early Riftbound games. I would forget everything, and I mean everything. I'd forget to give myself points for holding battlefields. I'd forget to activate conquering effects when I took control of a battlefield. I'd forget to use my legend ability at crucial moments. It was like my brain decided that Riftbound was too complicated and just started selectively ignoring rules. The holding points mistake was particularly painful because those points can add up quickly. I'd play entire games while I was so far behind on score, only to realize that I'd forgotten to give myself points on previous turns. It's like leaving money on the table, except the money is victory points and the table is every single turn of the game. The conquering effects were even worse because they often provide immediate value when you take a battlefield. Missing these felt like ordering a meal and then walking away before it arrived. You've done the hard work of conquering a battlefield, why wouldn't you take the reward? And don't get me started on forgetting legend abilities. These powerful effects can completely change the game, and I was treating them like they didn't exist. It's like having a superpower and forgetting that you can actually use it. Now here's a mistake that took me way too long to recognize. I was burning through my ruins every single turn like they were going out of style. Coming from a card game where you generally want to use your energy efficiently, I thought spending all my resources each turn was a smart play, but by emptying my ruin pool every turn, I left myself with no room to react to anything that my opponent did. They'd make a play, and I just have to sit there and take it because I had no resources left to respond. It's like spending your entire paycheck on day 1 and then wondering why you can't afford groceries later on in the month. Riftbound is much more interactive, and your opponent is constantly making moves that you need to respond to. And if you've spent everything on your own turn, you're basically playing with your hands tied behind your back. Learning to hold back some ruins for some reactive plays is a game changer. Suddenly I can actually participate in the back and forth that makes Riftbound exciting. Instead of just taking turns hitting fighting each other with no interaction. Now this mistake goes hand in hand with the previous one, but it deserves its own spotlight because it's crucial. I was completely ignoring how many ruins my opponent had available, which is like playing poker without looking at your opponent's chip stack. If your opponent has no ruins ready during your turn, you can move into battlefields or cast spells with confidence and knowing that they can't react. But if they're sitting on a full ruin pool, that's when you need to be careful about walking into their traps. I learned this lesson the hard way when I kept making aggressive plays against opponents who clearly had the resources to punish me. I'd move a unit into what looked like a favorable position, only to watch my opponent use their saved ruins to completely destroy my units. It finally made sense when someone explained it to me. If your opponent has no ruins ready, they're basically defenseless. That's your window to make aggressive plays. If they're loaded with ruins ready, maybe think twice before walking into their obvious trap. This awareness completely changed how I approach each turn. Instead of just focusing on my own plays, I started considering what my opponent could do in response. Now, I made the classic mistake of thinking that expensive cards automatically meant better cards. So naturally, I went out and bought some in my early days, pricey singles that I thought would instantly improve my deck. Plot twist, there are a lot of cards that I never actually used. The problem wasn't that the cards were bad, they were actually quite powerful. The problem was that I didn't understand how to build around them or when to use them effectively. It's like buying a Formula 1 car when you're still learning to drive stick shift. I had this beautiful, expensive cards sitting in my deck, but I never drew it at the right time, or when I did draw it, I didn't have the right setup to make it work. Now meanwhile, I was losing games to opponents using budget decks that were much more simple than mine, but they were more consistent and more focused. This taught me a valuable lesson about Riftbound. You can absolutely build competitive decks without breaking the bank. Understanding your strategy and building a cohesive deck is way more important than just jamming expensive cards together and hoping for the best. Focus on learning the game with affordable, consistent cards first. The expensive upgrades can come later when you actually understand how to use them. Now here's a mistake that's really highlighted my inexperience. I was absolutely terrible at sideboarding. For those unfamiliar, sideboarding is when you adjust your deck between games based on what you've learned about your opponent's strategy and cards. I would either not sideboard at all, thinking my main deck was perfect as is, or I'd make random changes that made no sense at all. It's like bringing an umbrella to a snowstorm. Technically, it's weather protection, but it's completely wrong for the situation. Now, the few times I did attempt to sideboard, I'd swap out cards without any real plan. I'd see that my opponent was playing aggressive units, so I'd randomly add some defensive cards without considering how they fit into my overall strategy. The result was a deck that was trying to do everything and succeeding at nothing. Good sideboarding requires understanding not just what your opponent's doing, but how your deck needs to adapt to it in order to counter it. It's an advanced skill that I definitely don't have at this time as a beginner, but recognizing that I was bad at it was the first step toward improvement. Now this mistake might seem counterintuitive, but hear me out. I was paying way too much attention to what was winning at the highest levels of Riftbound play, instead of focusing on learning the fundamentals with whatever deck that I had. I'd see that certain champions were dominating tournaments, and I'd think to myself that I need to switch to those in order to succeed. But here's the thing. I wasn't playing at a tournament level, I was still playing at the still figuring out the basic rules level. It's like watching professional basketball and thinking you need to attempt a three-pointer from half court when you're still learning how to dribble. The meta is important, but it's not relevant when you're still mastering the basics. I should have been focused more on learning my chosen deck inside and out, understanding the fundamental interactions, and also building solid gameplay habits. Instead, I was constantly second-guessing myself based on what I saw online. The meta will always be there when you're ready for it. But first, you need to actually learn how to play the game with whatever tools you have available to you. Now this mistake was both embarrassing and educational. I kept walking in my units into battles I couldn't win because I didn't properly understand my opponent's abilities. The most memorable example was forgetting about Master Yi's ability that gives him +2 might while he's defending alone. I'd see a battlefield with what looked like a manageable defender, do some quick math in my head, and confidently move my unit in for what I thought was an easy victory. Then my opponent would politely remind me about their legend ability, and suddenly my 4 power unit was facing a 6 power defender. And suddenly my 4 might unit was facing a 5 might defender. It's like challenging someone to arm wrestling without noticing that they're a professional bodybuilder. The math looked good until I factor in the information I was completely ignoring, which was Master Yi's legend ability. Now this taught me the importance of actually learning what each legend and champion can do, not just assuming I could figure it out on the fly. Each ability can completely change the math of a battle, and ignoring them is a recipe for disaster. Fortunately, most opponents at my Nexus nights were kind enough to let me take back obviously bad plays when I was clearly still learning. But in a competitive setting such as skirmishes, these mistakes would have been costly. My recommendation is that you take the time to read all the legend abilities that are currently out there. Now for the longest time, I didn't realize that you can play units onto battlefields you already control to help defend them. Now this seems obvious in hindsight, but when you're new and overwhelmed, even simple concepts can still slip by. I was treating each battlefield like it could only hold one unit, so once I controlled the battlefield, I'd ignore it and focus on another area. Meanwhile, my opponents were reinforcing their positions and making their battlefields much harder to conquer. It's like thinking you can only put one lock on your door. Sure, one lock provides security, but additional protection is usually better. The same principle applies to battlefield control in Riftbound. This realization opened up entirely new strategic possibilities. Suddenly, I could build defensive positions, create synergies between units on the same battlefield, and actually protect my investments instead of leaving them vulnerable. The game became much more interesting once I understood that battlefield control wasn't just about taking the territory by conquering, it was about holding and developing it. Now looking back at all these mistakes, there's a common theme. Riftbound has a steep learning curve, and trying to rush through it only leads to more confusion. Each of these mistakes taught me something valuable, but they also cost me a lot of games that could have been wins with better fundamentals. Now the good news is that making these mistakes early actually helped me become a better player. When you mess up this badly, the lessons tend to stick in your head. I'm much less likely to forget my champion now because I remember how frustrating it was to play without it. The Riftbound community, especially at my Nexus Night events, are incredibly patient with a lot of beginner mistakes that I make. People were happy to explain interactions, point out better plays, and generally help me learn from my errors instead of just crushing me and moving on. Now, if you're new to Riftbound, don't be discouraged by this list of mistakes. Everyone makes them. I just made them all spectacularly and in a rapid succession. The key is recognizing them, learning from them, and gradually building better habits. So start with the basics, follow the turn structure, play your champion, pay attention to rune costs, and actually read what the cards do. These fundamentals will serve you much better than trying to copy advanced strategies that you see online. Most importantly, be patient with yourself. Riftbound is a complex game with a lot of moving parts, and making mistakes is part of the learning process, and each error is an opportunity to improve. The satisfaction of finally getting these concepts right makes all the early struggles worth it. And plus, you'll have some great stories to tell about your beginner days, assuming that you're willing to admit to making these beginner mistakes. And trust me, if I can go from forgetting to play my champion to actually winning games, anyone can learn this game. It just takes time, patience, and a willingness to laugh at your own mistakes along the way.